The most astounding fact is the knowledge that the atoms that comprise life on Earth, the atoms that make up the human body, are traceable to the crucibles that cooked light elements into heavy elements in their core under extreme temperatures and pressures. These stars, the high mass ones among them, went unstable in their later years. They collapsed and then exploded, scattering their enriched guts across the galaxy.
I remember that every atom in my body was forged in a star. This matter, this body is mostly just empty space after all, and solid matter is just energy vibrating very slowly, and there is no me. There never was.
She blinded me with science!
One of the bigger shows being talked up by critics right now is Mike Flanagan's Midnight Mass, available on Netflix. It's been heralded as one of the best horror shows of modern time, with its creator receiving similar accolades for his previous effort, The Haunting of Hill House. Recently, my wife and I decided to give the show a watch, and what I found was a generally well-written and acted show, which wasn't a horror miniseries so much as one of the more explicit examples of religious deconstruction and religious programming I had ever seen, made all the more subversive by its great performances and generally good presentation. My series analysis here is going to be chock full of spoilers, so if you haven't watched the show yet and wish to do so, here's your warning. I'm going to thoroughly spoil the heck out of this show by first summarizing it in detail before analyzing. This step is important for the purposes of understanding and contextualizing what Flanagan is attempting before pulling the curtain back, so to speak. The show takes place on the fictional island of Crockett, with the town's promising yet prodigal son, Riley Flynn, returning home after serving time for killing a woman while drunk driving. Riley is a skeptical atheist, failed entrepreneur, and reformed alcoholic, racked by guilt for having killed someone, who now feels his life is in a hamster wheel loop where one day bleeds into the other after returning to Crockett. His is a life rudderless and purposeless, clouded by guilt and missed opportunities. The townspeople themselves are a conservative, predominantly Catholic bunch, serving as a good stand-in for Middle America. It's a predominantly white town with a smattering of minorities, including a Muhammadan sheriff, aptly named Sharif, who chose his position after receiving scrutiny and persecution for his Islamic affiliation upon entering the NYPD following 9/11, and speaking up against the targeting of Muslim minorities in New York City for weed and other such minor violations. There are other misfits as well, such as the town drunk Joe Colley, wise lesbian skeptic and doctor Sarah Gunning, and single mother-to-be Erin Green, who's found God after her pregnancy and serves as a local school teacher. Alongside the worldly wise Erin is the quintessential condescending, holier-than-thou church lady Bev Kane. Bev is also heavily implicated in scalping the Christian fisherfolk of the town of the payouts they'd received from an oil company who spilled in their area and affected their livelihoods. Apart from the general secular humanist message of the show, there's a minor but present environmentalist side as well. After Riley's arrival on Crockett, the town putters along with the people trying to eke out a living from the sea. The town's elderly priest, the dotard Monsignor Pruitt, is absent from town, apparently for medical reasons, when a young charismatic priest, Father Paul, arrives on the island of Crockett. Coinciding with his arrival, strange things begin to happen. First, a small island across from Crockett, inhabited by feral cats, becomes the domain of some unknown terror which begins stalking the cats. One morning, dozens of dead cats from the island wash up along the shores of Crockett, with the townspeople at a loss as to what might have caused such a thing. A few of the people of Crockett also begin to get the uneasy feeling that they're being watched at night, spying a pair of glimmering eyes looking at them from outside their homes here and there. Meanwhile, the new priest, Father Paul, begins giving impassioned sermons, offering communion to the faithful congregation, till one day, apparently led by the Holy Spirit, he offers the body and blood of Christ to Lisa Scarborough. Lisa is the crippled daughter of the town's mayor, who never misses a chance to attend service. Father Paul implores her to stand from her wheelchair to receive the sacrament, and miraculously, she does so. This miracle triggers a revival in the town. Now the pews are packed with the townsfolk. Riley and Dr. Sarah are skeptical, however. Not only is Lisa no longer lame, but Riley's mom no longer needs her glasses. His dad's back, worn out from years as a fisherman, is healed, and eventually the dementia of Dr. Sarah's elderly mother, Mildred, begins to miraculously improve. She becomes ever more spry despite her advanced age. Riley begins attending AA meetings on the island under Father Paul, saving him a trip to the mainland. The formerly crippled Lisa reconciles with Joe Colley, the town drunk who crippled her with his reckless shooting, and he joins Riley in AA meetings as well. These miracles, though, seem to be taking a toll on Father Paul, who is seen to be coughing blood and in generally poor health. Around this time, Father Paul begins to make cryptic statements in his private confessions, asking the Lord to forgive him for lying to his congregation. About the same time, the local marijuana peddler, nicknamed Bowl, steps inside an abandoned house at night, hearing noises within, where he's killed and taken by some unseen creature. And in Father Paul's confessions, we begin to understand the so-called miraculous events around the town, and the true identity of the enigmatic Father Paul is revealed. Father Paul reveals in his private confessions to God to be none other than the island's long-standing priest, Monsignor Pruitt. Father Pruitt recalls in his confessions how he went to the Holy Land after being sent from the island. But in his demented state, he lost his way and somehow found himself outside the walls of Jerusalem when a sandstorm of biblical proportions grips the region, unearthing an ancient underground entrance. Seeking refuge from the storm, the feeble-minded Monsignor Pruitt enters, lights a match, and spots some disquieting eyes in the darkness. Lighting another match, he comes face to face with a vampire who strikes him to the ground and begins feeding on his blood. In his final moments, the fear that had gripped him begins to leave, and he begins reciting the Lord's Prayer, hallucinating a halo above the head of the creature, who, seemingly aware of what's going on, ceases his attack on Monsignor Pruitt and feeds him its own blood. The next morning, Monsignor Pruitt awakens to find himself of sound mind and a much younger, more vital version of himself. Believing the creature to be an angel, he feels himself called by God to take the creature back to the Isle of Crockett to work miracles, and seemingly intent on immanentizing the eschaton, that is, hurrying up the end times. Pruitt then mixes the blood of the vampire in with the communion wine, and its natural restorative powers begin to heal the people of Crockett. On the island of Crockett, after the miracles, the ailing Father Pruitt then dies in the midst of some parishioners in his domicile, apparently from an overdose of vampire blood, and shortly reawakens with the characteristics of vampirism: heightened senses, a deadly aversion to light, and a thirst for blood. Shortly after, things go from miraculous to bizarre on the island of Crockett, with Aaron Green's body having carried out an unexplainable spontaneous abortion, with there being no sign of her having carried a child. Following this traumatic experience, the distraught Aaron Green meets with Riley Flynn, and they begin speculating about what happens when a person dies. Riley gives the Carl Sagan answer of, essentially, "We're all just stardust, man. Ash to ash, dust to dust. My brain is gonna dump DMT when I die. I'll see crazy flashes of light as my life speeds before my eyes. And then my atoms will return to the universe, man." On the other hand, Erin recounts a heartwarming belief that her unborn baby is now with the Lord and departed loved ones, and that the baby's purpose was to save its mother's life, which had been previously squandered away prior to her pregnancy, and that God's will was somehow in effect, and hope for the hereafter springs eternal. Shortly after, the town drunk Joe Colley is tempted by alcohol and seeks the aid of the now resurrected Monsignor Pruitt, who kills him and feasts on his blood. About the same time, Dr. Sarah's mother, the aged Mildred Gunning, is not only healed of her dementia, but in fact begins reverse aging, going from very frail and elderly to apparent middle-aged. Riley Flynn's parents also begin to show signs of de-aging as well. Noticing Joe's absence from Alcoholics Anonymous, Riley asks Father Paul, aka Monsignor Pruitt, where Joe is, who replies that he went to the mainland to visit his sister. Riley knows this is a lie, since Joe told him of his sister's passing earlier in the show. Riley returns to the community rec center one evening to press Father Paul about what really happened to Joe Cawley. Unbeknownst to him, at the same time, the vampires returned to Father Paul to refill the communion wine chalice with its blood. Walking in on this, the startled Riley is attacked by the vampire and then killed. Immediately after, though, he is resurrected by Father Paul. Riley now manifests all the signs of vampirism, including a burning aversion to sunlight. Father Paul reveals everything to him, including his true identity as the reborn Monsignor Pruitt. Traumatized by these revelations, Riley is allowed to leave by Father Pruitt, despite the counsel of acolyte and all-around detestable church lady Bev Keane. Deluded as he is, Pruitt believes in free will and allows Riley to go forth unopposed, hoping he'll accept the revelation he's been given. This does not go according to plan. Riley departs and secretly leaves goodbye letters for his family, who currently don't know of his whereabouts. He also leaves them a letter to have delivered to Monsignor Pruitt. Riley then seeks out Erin Green that night and invites her out onto the water in a rowboat under the starlight. Tempted to feed on her, he resists and tells her everything. She doesn't doubt his sincerity, but finds it hard to believe. As one last piece of proof, an attempt to convince her to leave the island, he waits with her in the rowboat till the sun rises, and then burns to death under its rays as a vampire, seeing a vision in his eyes of the woman he killed, beckoning him to death. Traumatized by this, Erin Green returns to shore and attempts to cautiously save what townsfolk she can, who are now preparing for the midnight mass of Easter. She's able to win over Sharif, Dr. Sarah Gunning, and her mother Mildred, who was incensed by the militant sermon of Monsignor Pruitt. Erin also puts Riley's parents on their guard, despite their unwillingness to accept his death, and telling Erin off before she could divulge the truth of Monsignor Pruitt and the so-called angel. Midnight Mass begins with most of the town in attendance, including the aforementioned skeptics, and Monsignor Pruitt finally reveals the angel. The town is horrified by what they see, but Pruitt calms them down and then convinces the congregation to commit a Jim Jones-style mass suicide and be born again as warriors for Christ. Among the first to do so is Sharif's apostate son, Ari, who rises again as a vampire. Pruitt is shot by Sharif, who attempts to rescue his son, but Monsignor Pruitt is able to heal himself and recover from the gunshot wound. Those who don't drink the Kool-Aid are killed and or turned by the reborn flock, save for Erin and company, now with Riley's mother, Annie Flynn, in tow. Fleeing the church, they find Bev Keane, skulking behind the sanctuary, too afraid to sacrifice herself, and shown to be a hypocrite despite her big talk. Bev is shot by Sharif while attempting to stop them, and they leave the church through the back. When she awakens, she has the church opened up and the congregation floods out to convert the rest of the island, despite Monsignor Pruitt's wishes. Murder and mayhem ensue across Crockett. All the boats and the cell tower have been sabotaged to prevent anyone from leaving or communicating with the mainland. With no hope of escape from the island, Erin Green and company take refuge in the Flynn home with Annie. But the reborn acolyte Bev Keane and her lackey Sturge find them, calling them out of the house and throwing Molotov cocktails inside to flush them out. Annie Flynn meets them outside in the front of the house and sacrifices herself so the others can escape. The now acting head of the cult, Bev Keane, commands for all the buildings on Crockett to be burned, and that the only sanctuaries to remain be the rec center and church to shield those she deems worthy from the sunlight. Monsignor Pruitt, disillusioned by what has happened, confides in the now youthful Mildred Gunning. He acknowledges their romantic past together and that her daughter, skeptic par excellence, Dr. Sarah, is in fact their secret love child. He confesses that his main reason for returning to Crockett with the angel was to save her from death and have another chance with Mildred, to start over and end all the death and suffering in the world. Mildred corrects him that the natural order is for the old to fade away. Pruitt then disavows Bev King and her actions, who has now returned to the church. Bev also finds that her plans have gone sideways as well. Erin and company have been busy burning the boats to prevent them from going to the mainland and converting the masses. The church has been caught aflame as well by Mildred, with Erin and Sharif almost burning down the rec center, the last refuge of the vampiric from the sunlight. Attempting to do so, Erin is attacked by the vampire, who, so preoccupied with her blood, barely notices her cutting holes in its wings. Riley's younger brother, Warren, and Lisa Scarborough head out into the bay in a rowboat, in relative safety, to watch what happens from afar. Sharif is gutshot and sits, slowly dying, a stroke away from igniting the gasoline-doused rec center, when his son, Ari, picks up his father's lighter and ignites the rec center, burning the last refuge of Bev Keane and those who have turned vampiric. As Erin dies, she has a vision of herself talking to Riley about death, similar to the scene earlier in the series. Only this time, however, she goes down the Carl Sagan route, saying that essentially personhood is a delusion. She'll burn out in death and her energy will be reabsorbed by the universe. Who she was will be dispersed everywhere and nowhere. Oblivion, a destruction of the self and a return to the one. A return to the universe and not a literal reconnection to the divine or a personal god. Basically, poetic atheism wrapped in Lawrence Krauss, Neil deGrasse Tyson style language. Sharif and Ari return to the beach and begin praying to Allah as the sun begins to rise, with Sharif shortly thereafter expiring from his gunshot. Bev Keane, ever the paragon of religious hypocrisy throughout the show, begins digging a hole to try and hide from the sun. Monsignor Pruitt sits with Mildred and their now dead daughter Sarah. He throws away his collar shortly before the sun comes up, showing his renunciation of the priesthood, probably his faith too, as he clings to his now dead or doomed family. The remaining townsfolk of Crockett gather together, singing a hymn as the sun begins to rise. Warren Flynn and Lisa Scarborough see the vampire fly off with its now tattered wings, struggling to fly, and they speculate that the vampire won't make it to land 30 miles away before the sun rises. This last image is interesting symbolically, with the vampire representing the manifestation of ancient yet dangerous religious backwardness, damaged by brave skepticism, personified by Aaron Green at the end of the show, and fleeing for its life from literal illumination or enlightenment. Backwards, dangerous, superstitious religion can only hide and survive in darkness. As the show comes to a close, the sun, the very essence of illumination, rises on Crockett, and all its inhabitants die burning, accepting their fate, except, of course, the cowardly religious hypocrite Bev Keane. The show ends with Lisa Scarborough saying to Warren Flynn in the canoe that she can't feel her legs, proving the supposedly miraculous to be merely material manipulation, and thus the last living reminder of the supernatural in the show is erased. Now there's a lot to analyze here, and I can only hope to hit on some of the points of messaging within the show. First and importantly, the creator of the show, Mike Flanagan, has openly said that Midnight Mass is something of an allegory for his departure from the Catholic Church, overcoming addiction and accepting atheism. Some of the people who sung the show's praises picked up on this and empathized with it right away, including YouTube film reviewer Chris Stuckman, who immediately empathized with both the message of the show, relating it to his own experience of leaving the Jehovah's Witness sect. With that in mind, there's so many ways in which the show is an example of not just religious deconstruction, but also religious and social programming as well. We'll begin the analysis with the aspect of social messaging. Regarding the social messaging angle, there's not a whole lot you won't find in other pieces of modern progressive media. For example, there's an implicit but pretty clear pro-diversity message sprinkled throughout the show. The mayor, who happens to be one of the weaker written characters in the show, is the father of Lisa Scarborough and in an interracial marriage, just as one example. There's also a smattering of diversity and biracial couples who you wouldn't exactly expect to find on a small Nantucket-style island. The townsfolk are decent, but some of them are singled out as backward and racist or xenophobic by the town's Muslim sheriff, especially the caricature church lady Bev Keane. Also, the mother of the first victim of the vampire, the young ne'er-do-well weed dealer named Bull, is portrayed as the quintessential southern white trash single mom, fulfilling the trope that somehow the entire white underclass of America is miraculously all from the South, even if they've apparently lived their whole lives on a New England island. The people in the show who were the wisest, most deserving of trust, deference, and show the most character by the end, especially, are literally all women, religious, ethnic, or sexual minorities, and medical experts. These are the enlightened heroes. The religious deconstructionism is kind of implicit in the social messaging of the show, but this becomes more sophisticated and explicit, apart from the usual progressive social platitudes you'd expect to find. From relatively early on in the show, the religious characters are either well-meaning, if not particularly imaginative normies, tut-tutting hypocrites, typified again by Bev Keane, or ultimately deceivers high on their own supply, like Monsignor Pruitt. The faith of all the characters who are giving any major attention or analysis for the film are incessantly psychologized. Monsignor Pruitt does what he does, manipulates and lies to people, not ultimately because of his faith, but because it's an opportunity to have a second chance with his illegitimate family, the aged Mildred and their whip-smart lesbian skeptic daughter, Dr. Sarah. The appearance of piety by Bev Keane is essentially just a means by which she can appear superior, lord over others, and get access to church money. The fervent faith of Lisa Scarborough is a way for her to cope with her crippled state, and Aaron Green's turn to Christianity before the show begins essentially as a therapeutic move on her part. Religion was a life raft for her to grab onto after her pregnancy and leaving her abusive ex. She participates because it helps her, not because she thinks it's literally true. The message of the show hitherto can be summed up as diversity good, trust the science, women and minorities will save us, and people who hold on to religion really just need therapy. Apart from psychoanalyzing the religious sentiment of its characters, Midnight Mass attempts to deconstruct religion and Catholicism in particular by implying that religious myth-making is used as an attempt to explain the unknown. This is the sort of thing you'll often hear Reddit tier atheists say, but the show does so by showing and not explicitly arguing for this position, which, in fairness, is probably a more effective propaganda method. Often you'll hear from skeptics that religious people will witness a phenomenon and then superimpose their religious presuppositions on it in order to make sense of the said phenomenon within their paradigm. This is literally played out when the senile Monsignor Pruitt encounters the vampire underground and then fits that phenomenon within the framework of his own religious worldview. He is attacked by a vampire and is fed its blood, which has restorative qualities for material reasons. However, this is willfully reinterpreted by him as encountering an angel of the Lord and being reborn by the blood of Christ. This is done later in Midnight Mass as well, when the people die of ingesting poison but are reborn after drinking the blood of the vampire. Their reanimation through vampiric blood is once more force-fit into a mutilated understanding of the Christian concept of being born again. These are but some of the ways in which Midnight Mass attempts to deconstruct Catholicism and Christianity more broadly through the religious myth-making pseudo-God of the Gaps argument. Yet what does Midnight Mass offer in place of religion after deconstructing it? Because contrary to what most critics might think, it does offer an alternative religious worldview. The religious programming of Midnight Mass is essentially secular humanism, wrapped up in the usual platitudes of, "We're just stardust, man," which is exactly the sort of platitudinal jibber-jabber you'll hear from trademark skeptics and scientism aficionados like Lawrence Krauss, Richard Dawkins, or whoever. It's no wonder then that Christianity is portrayed as at once a helpful crutch, but also harmful, dangerous, unjust, cruel, backwards, and manipulative. In contrast, the enlightened secular humanism of Riley Flynn and Dr. Sarah is shown as moral and driven by a hunger for the truth. This narrative in the show, of course, conveniently jumps over the impossibility for moral or ethical absolutes outside of a religious system, taking it for granted that morality exists on its own, apart from any sort of metaphysical reality, and naively portraying atheism and skepticism as a force of order against religious chaos and backwardness. Flanagan cobbles together and sells a sort of godless Neoplatonism. All that exists is the material. The self is an illusion made up of atoms and energy which must melt away into the materialist monad, into the universe itself. But instead of the spiritual, metaphysical, divine, and ultimate reality of the one in Neoplatonism, it's just the universe in Midnight Mass. People are just the product of physics and stardust, and yet the show tries to elevate humanity beyond his station, as is often the case with secular humanism. In the absence of a real deity, the show tries to deify man himself. Man is, I am that I am, and thus man is God, using biblical language directly quoted from the show in context. It's an elevation of matter and humanity as pseudo-divine at the expense of the literal divine. This exact message is explicit in the final monologue of the show, where Aaron Green apostatizes from Christianity and gives a several-minute monologue that could have been written by a more poetically inspired, amazing atheist.
Myself. That's the problem. That isn't. The body stops a cell at a time, but the brain keeps firing those neurons. I remember that every atom in my body was forged in a star. This matter, this body, is mostly just empty space after all, and solid matter is just energy vibrating very slowly, and there is no me. There never was. There is no point where any of that ends and I begin. I remember I am energy, not memory, not self. My name, my personality, my choices all came after me. I was before them and I will be after, and I'm returning all things apart. All of us apart. More galaxies in the universe than grains of sand on the beach, and that's what we're talking about when we say God. The One. We are the cosmos dreaming of itself. There is no time. There is no death. Life is a dream, and I am all of it. I am everything. I am all. I am that I am.
I'll link this scene in the show notes if you want to see the whole thing, but it really is something else, and a bit on the nose. The implicit and explicit message of Midnight Mass is that religion is a crutch at the best of times, and ultimately it's a house of lies to explain the unexplained, divide people, exclude minorities, gather undeserved status and resources to bad people, and it kills and victimizes innocents while telling them that the Lord works in mysterious ways. But hey, we're stardust, so feel better about yourself. But also, morality totally exists, and it's independent of God just because it does. And oh yes, minorities, women, doctors, LGBT, and skepticism will save us. Literally, trust the experts. Put down the Bible, grab a science book, and the world will be a better place. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the profound message of Midnight Mass. This has been Mr. Patriarch. Thanks a lot for joining me and making it to the end. If you've enjoyed this analysis, please give it a like and share around. It'll help out with the algorithm, and the best way you can help grow this channel is, of course, by sharing. Also, if you want to help donate to the channel, please consider becoming a backer on Subscribestar. Special thanks to my backers Burnham's Ghost, Count Elmsley, Symbols, Turnian, Fokron, JNS77, Fresno Pharmacist, Itinerant, The Prudentialist, and Skeptical Waves. Your guys' continued support means a lot and is a big help around here. If you're interested in joining, for $2 a month you can get access to exclusive content and other goodies while helping me buy diapers and making sure this channel stays sustainable. I've also recently been laid off, so any support I do get is especially appreciated at this time. Some of you have informed me that YouTube hasn't been sending notifications when I put out a new video. So for those of you who want to stay up to date, I have also created a Telegram account. Entry is free, so go click on the link below if you're interested. Aside from that, you can also find my videos on Odyssey. Between Odyssey and Telegram, I'm hoping to make this channel of mine cancel-proof, and with your help, maybe someday it will be. Thanks to all, and I'll catch you next time. Patriarch, out.